as I do for you guys, someone had suggested I should do some reviews of Indian Bollywood-style horror movies, and I have actually done a couple of Bollywood movie reviews in the past, but since I'm clearly an English person with no kind of ties to India, I kind of haven't done all that many. But, you know, challenge accepted, and I thought I would do one which is actually a remake of my favourite film of all time. What is my favourite film of all time? Well, it's Fright Night from 1985. And this is a Tamil language 1989 remake, unofficial remake of Fright Night. Now, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of this movie. It will be in the description, or the title here at least. But effectively, the literal translation is Moonless Night. And this movie has never actually been officially released outside of India. So I had to watch it on YouTube, and there is no English subtitles. So there you go. With that in mind, obviously I can only review it based on what I've seen. There's a few phrases and words that are said in English, but for the most part it's in Tamil language. So my review is going to be a little kinder, because there's certain things I just don't know whether I can kind of judge it too harshly, because I couldn't really understand what was going on, and certainly in regards to dialogue. And I suspect the version I saw was somewhat edited, because there were some very ropey edits in this version. So I'm going to be a little gentle with this movie, just to let you know, because I didn't feel I could properly kind of give my full critic thoughts on it. Anyway, let's talk about it. So in 1989, remake, quite close remake I have to say, of Fright Night. And believe it or not, this isn't the only remake of Fright Night that came out of India. I believe there was another version that came out in 2014, which would have come out with after the Colin Farrell remake of Fright Night. Although I believe that one, which is called Neighbours, is a looser remake from what I understand. I haven't watched that one yet. I might watch and review that one down the line. But as far as I know, that one's a looser remake, whilst this one is a very much a almost shot-for-shot remake in many ways. In case you are unfamiliar with the story, Fright Night is actually a kind of adaptation of Rear Window. And there have been other kind of, equivalents, you might say, of Fright Night, even in the horror genre. There was a werewolf one called Never Cry Werewolf, which starred Nina Dobrev, which was effectively another kind of Fright Night remake. But it tells the story of a young guy who thinks there is a vampire living next door to him. Of course, no one believes him, but bodies start kind of piling up. He kind of ropes his friends and in Fright Night a kind of a horror host to try and help him. And eventually, you have to get your kind of showdown. I'm not going to spoil it just in case you haven't seen it, but there you go. So this is a close remake in many ways. They have changed a couple of bits, primarily with the Peter Vincent character. He's not a kind of a horror show or horror movie actor here. He's actually the uncle of the Evil Ed character, who happens to be a priest. That's one of the few differences in this movie. You've also got a kind of assistant to this character, although he just seems to have disappeared in the movie, which is why I think maybe the version I've seen was somewhat edited. You've also have a couple of other kind of like events that happen in the movie. We get the kind of the Charlie Brewster character, who in this version is called Johnny, being attacked by like a load of pigeons, and Johnny, aka the Charlie Brewster character, hires a thug to try and break into the house of the vampire. In the original Fright Night movie, was Jerry Dandridge was the vampire. Here he is called John Peter. So there you go. So we have this thug kind of breaking into this vampire house and coming croppers. But to be honest, most of it is somewhat of a close remake, you would say. So let's talk about what works in this movie. I think if you are a fan of Fright Night, it's actually kind of somewhat fun to watch this kind of... It is a very low budget remake, like this foreign kind of remake of this movie, because they do a fairly good job on a low budget of actually kind of recreating some of the kind of the scenes and even some of the kind of the small nuances, like for example some of the kind of the movements in the face and things like that, quite closely to the original movie in some shots at the very least. So this helps, I think, because Fright Night I think is quite a solid film. Even though it's my favourite film, I still don't think it's a 10 out of 10, by the way. I would still be somewhat critical with it. But I still think it's a well put together movie. And part of the reason I think from the original Fright Night works is because it's a good mix of drama, comedy, serious moments, seduction, scares with great music. And because this movie follows the map set by the original Fright Night so closely, it can't help but benefit from some of the same kind of traits. So the pacing of this movie is very similar to Fright Night, the original Fright Night. So it benefits from having quite good pacing, for example, because the things happen more or less the kind of the same time frame in the original film. So yeah, it's not original and it is copying it more or less beat for beat, but because of that, it does benefit from some of the kind of the things that worked in the kind of the Fright Night movie. The guy who plays the Jerry Dandridge character, the vampire in this movie, is called John Peter. I actually think it's a reasonable approximation of the Jerry Dandridge character. So it kind of looks reasonably kind of similar. Obviously played by Chris Sarandon in the original movie. But I've got to say that, you know what, I mean, he's not as well developed, I would say, but not a bad approximation. They wear the very similar clothes. They have a kind of a similar kind of hair. So it's quite kind of like, oh, do you know what, it kind of looks similar. And even our guy, Johnny, who's our Charlie Brewster character, he has that same kind of like clueless charm that I think the Charlie Brewster character had in the first movie and in the second movie as well. Arguably, you could say Charlie Brewster was a bit of a dickhead, really, but I still kind of liked him. But yeah, this our main protagonist guy, wet behind the ears, is quite a kind of a likeable kind of goof, even without really understanding much of what has been said here. You know, you couldn't get the gist because I am so familiar with the original Fright Night movie. I don't really need to hear so much because I kind of know what the gist of the story is, so to speak. So there's that, and it's quite fun to see these very low budget approximations of the kind of the original Fright Night movie and sequences. But there are still some reasonable attempts here, I think, at kind of like framing, some cheaper cinematography, but I still think it's a little bit effective here and there, using kind of dry ice and things like that, and it does have that kind of that Indian Bollywood elements to it as well. There is a couple of musical numbers, one of which is where they're going to go into the club, and obviously that is a kind of a musical scene within the actual original Fright Night, so it kind of makes sense. And then we have the kind of the random dance number where the vampire is seducing the Amy character a little bit later on. But there's only a couple. So I think if you are a Fright Night fan, it's an oddity. It's kind of an interesting kind of movie because it's an 80s film. It's of that time. It's not like the kind of the modern remake, and it does follow the plot very, very kind of closely, albeit it's almost like a homemade version. So I think it has a little bit of indelible charm to it, I will say. Yeah, it's not a very well made movie, and it does kind of really show at times. But yeah, I have to say it was still engaging to me because I'm so familiar with that original movie anyway. Let's talk about what I think legitimately does not work in this film. One thing really grated on me in this movie, and that was the music. It uses the same kind of musical beats the whole way through the film, and it's just like, it's just driving me insane. I mean, it's just this kind of like classical kind of style, like almost like a kind of a 1920s kind of style of like Universal horror movie style music that just plays nearly practically any scene where there's a vampire on screen. and sometimes it just simply doesn't suit. One of the big elements of the original Fright Night was the music by Brad Fiedel, which I think really helped that movie a lot. This is not the case with this movie. The music in this one is terrible, and weirdly, there's an odd use of a John Williams Star Wars music in this as well, which is, I couldn't believe it, to be honest. I won't say what bit or how it refers to it, but yeah, you'll be watching, you're thinking, really? But anyway, to be honest, the music is pretty bad. Now, it's a very low budget movie, and some of the kind of they kind of recreated the VFX sequences. I mean, the vampires have like goofy fangs, to be honest. The sequence where Evil Ed transforms into a wolf, now he transforms into an Alsatian, and the kind of where he transforms back into a kind of a more humanoid. Yeah, it's pretty kind of it's pretty low tech. Let me just kind of say that. Yeah, so it's the VFX here are not good. There's also some kind of quite pretty cheesy moments. The kind of the Billy Cole character, who is the kind of the henchman of Jerry Dandridge in the original Fright Night. Here, there's actually a fist fight with him, the Peter Vincent character, and the Charlie Brewster character, which is quite kind of funny and weird. They kind of point to the fact he may be more human in this one, but gets kind of resurrected by John Peter to become a ghoul or whatever. But it more or less plays the same, to be honest. The acting is hard for me to judge. It doesn't seem particularly strong, if I'm honest, but it's hard for me to kind of judge. There are a few words here that are in English, and it's. I mean, one of the things I would say in regards to the acting, and even though I can't understand the words, I can kind of understand the emotion and the cadences behind the performances, if that makes sense. So even though I think visually speaking, the guy who plays the vampire, the John Peter, when he's talking and stuff, you get none of that kind of inflections in the kind of the emotions and the kind of the performance, so to speak. Even though I can't understand the dialogue, I can still understand the kind of the emotional resonance which is kind of going through that performance. And that just isn't there compared to Chris Sarandon's performance in the original, of course. So, even though, I'm being a little more gentle with my kind of critiques, to be honest with this one, I still would say the acting is a little below par. Now, there's some really ropey edits in this one, which makes me think the version I have seen on YouTube may not be the full original version. I don't know. It is kind of like, 80 odd minutes in length, what I saw. But I got a feeling it might have been longer because there's just some very abrasive edits in this one. But maybe I'll chalk that one up to, obviously it being cut down to go onto YouTube or something. I don't know. And ultimately, although it has a couple of slightly new elements, there's a cricket scene in it. It is from India, let's be honest. But it is more or less a straight remake, even more kind of like similar than the actual kind of Fright Night remake that came out in 2011. So it's very, very, very close remake. How do we rate this one? I mean, like I said, I am going to be a little kinder to this film because I feel the version I saw was probably hacked to pieces and I couldn't really understand the dialogue. That being said, it's a very cheap film. It's kind of fun if you're a Fright Night fan. I don't think it's a particularly good film, but it's still an enjoyable film. It benefits from having a good story ultimately, relatively well paced, and they do kind of recreate, albeit on the low budget version, some elements of the Fright Night movie that I think they've translated reasonably well. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Realistically, I think this is probably a little less deserving than that, but I'll give it a 4 out of 10 because, like I said, I can't feel like I can fully come down this movie because I can't stand what's the dialogue and things. So, have you seen it? If you do want to see it, you can find it on YouTube. Just search for the title here, and then you'll come across it. You'd have to be a relatively big Fright Night fan, I guess, but there you go. Anyway, please do let me know if you have seen it or going to see it after watching this review. I'd be very curious. And, you know, what do you think of Fright Night? It's my favourite film. Let me know. So 4 out of 10 for this one. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.